Let's dive into the hidden history behind every single language class you've ever taken. We're going to unpack just why we teach English the way we do today.
Seriously, have you ever stopped to think about it? That high school Spanish class, that app on your phone. Why all the drills? Or maybe why no drills? Why so much group work? Why is it all about grammar? Or for that matter, why does it feel like grammar is totally ignored?
Well, the way you learn a language today is no accident. It's actually the result of this massive 200-year-long debate. And the best way to picture it is like a giant pendulum, swinging back and forth between completely different ideas about the one single best way to learn. And our story kicks off at one extreme end of that swing with a super strict, very organized rule book. Okay, picture this. You're a student way back in the 1800s. The classroom is dead silent. You've got some classic literature in front of you, and your entire job is to painstakingly translate it, word for word, into your own language, while the teacher explains every single tiny grammar rule. That right there was the grammar translation method. You know, learning a language this way was a lot like dissecting a frog in biology class. You could perfectly name every single part, the nouns, the verbs, the clauses, but you never actually saw how the language lived and breathed as something people actually, used to talk to each other. And here's the huge trade-off. Sure, it was organized and you became an absolute master of grammar rules, but the massive downside? You could ace a written test but be completely unable to order a cup of coffee in real life. You knew all the rules, but you couldn't actually play the game. So you can probably guess what happened next, right? The pendulum swung. And it swung hard. Educators got so tired of these silent classrooms, and they decided, you know what? People need to actually talk. And that gave us the direct method. The philosophy here was super simple. No translation. Ever. The teacher only speaks English and uses pictures and gestures and points at things in the room to get the meaning across. The whole idea was to force your brain to make a direct link between a word and an idea, just like when you were a little kid learning your very first language. The best way to think of it is like learning to swim by being tossed into the deep end of the pool. Yeah, it's a shock to the system, and it can be a little scary, but it forces you to start moving and thinking in a totally new way really fast. But of course, this led to a whole new set of problems. Students were definitely speaking and understanding way better, but for someone just starting out, it could be totally confusing. And with no clear grammar lessons, the actual rules of the language could feel like a complete mystery. It was interactive, for sure, but it could also be pretty chaotic. So after that burst of free-flowing and, let's be honest, sometimes messy conversation, the pendulum started to swing back towards order and structure and discipline. And this time, it was powered by psychology.
Okay, it's 1955. You've got these big headphones on in the language lab. Your teacher's voice crackles through. Repeat. The book is on the table. You repeat it back. Repeat. The pen is on the table. You repeat it again. This was the audiolingual method. The core belief was that language is just a set of habits, and the best way to build those habits is through endless repetition and drills.
Now, this was fantastic for building language muscle memory. Your pronunciation could become nearly perfect, and you could spit out flawless sentences without even thinking. But here's the problem. They weren't your sentences. It was all very mechanical. The second a real conversation went off script, students were totally lost. So, after decades of this robotic repetition, you can imagine that teachers and students started to get, pretty bored. They started asking a really simple question. And that frustration led to the next huge swing, communicative language teaching, or CLT. The goal here shifted completely. It wasn't about perfect grammar or memorized lines anymore. It was all about one thing. Can you get your message across? This is where our modern classrooms got things like role-playing, solving problems in groups, and using real stuff like restaurant menus and city maps. Honestly, this approach was a real game changer. It made learning feel relevant and way more motivating. But, and there's always a but, right? With the focus so heavily on just being fluent, grammatical accuracy could sometimes take a hit. One really popular version of this, called task-based language teaching, came along and tried to fix that. A task-based lesson totally flips the usual script. First, you just do something real, like plan a weekend trip with a partner using a real map and a budget. You just use whatever English you've got to get the job done. Then, only after you're finished, the teacher steps in and helps you analyze the language you used, correcting your mistakes and teaching the grammar you actually needed. It's all about learning by doing, then refining. Okay, so after all this swinging back and forth, from crazy strict grammar rules to free-for-all conversations, from robotic drills to real-world tasks, a whole new way of thinking started to bubble up. Maybe, just maybe, the goal shouldn't be to find the one single best method. And that brings us to right now, to the modern era of post-method pedagogy. The idea is simple, but it's also pretty profound. There's no magic bullet. A great teacher doesn't just follow one recipe. Instead, they have a whole toolkit filled with different techniques from all these methods we've talked about, and they know exactly which tool to use for which student and in which situation. And this really shows you how powerful that flexibility can be. A teacher might use a quick grammar drill from the audiolingual method to nail down a common mistake, but then immediately switch into a communicative role play. This approach really empowers teachers to be creative professionals who design the best learning experience for the actual students sitting right there in their classroom. Okay, let's wrap this all up. After a 200-year journey following that pendulum swinging back and forth, where does that leave us? This table basically tells the whole story, doesn't it? You can literally see the main focus shifting from accuracy to fluency, and you can see the teacher's role changing from this rigid authority figure to a flexible designer of learning. It's the whole journey in one spot. And the ultimate conclusion from over a century of all this theory and practice is basically this. The search for the one perfect method, it's over. The best method is the one a good teacher creates and adapts for their own specific classroom. And that leaves us with one last question for you. Think back on the best, or maybe the worst, language class you've ever had. What was it that really made the difference? Was it the textbook and the official method they were using? Or was it the teacher and their ability to adapt and connect and just bring the language to life? What really matters more?